Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Military Personnel Subcommittee. I'm the chair, Jackie Spear, and today we are going to have a hearing entitled #MeTooMoment, an examination of sexual harassment and perceived retaliation in the Department of Defense and at Fort Hood. The hearing will now come to order. We are here to discuss a pernicious military culture that time and time again, SAPRO report after SAPRO report, exposes an environment that is ripe for sexual harassment, where women are afraid to report their harassers because of a stigma, fear of retaliation, ostracism, or worse, fear that they won't be believed, and their harassers won't be held accountable. By declaring #IamVanessaGuillen, thousands of service members and veterans have taken to the streets and social media demanding safety and respect, demanding that the rules of the, quote, old boys club and the, quote, locker room talk are no longer the price of admission, demanding that the sexually explicit language in the motor pool, in the field, or in the office stop, demanding that the unwelcome stares in the dining facility and the unyielding sexual propositions, or worse, stop. In an institution that prides itself in cohesiveness to leave no soldier behind, we are failing. These service members and veterans who have taken to the streets, spurred by the horrific circumstances surrounding Specialist Vanessa Guillen's disappearance and murder, raised their voices and laid bare their stories of sexual harassment and assault in the military. For too long, they have lived and suffered in silence, silenced by a culture that doesn't trust women, that questions their competence, that is suspicious of their motives, that perceives them as weak and unreliable. But their voices will never again be silenced. When our service members pledge their lives to defend our nation, when their parents, brothers, sisters, loved ones entrust their child, their sister, their friend to the military, it should be with the comfort that they will not be sexually harassed, demeaned, raped, or brutally murdered by one of their own. Specialist Guillen's death will not be in vain. By now you know the story. Specialist Guillen was murdered in an arms room on Fort Hood on April 22nd, 2020. For her family and loved ones, there is the memory of an outstanding young soldier and the terrible belief that she had been sexually harassed by someone in her chain of command. After Specialist Guillen's sister reported that Specialist Guillen was sexually harassed but afraid to report for fear of retaliation, hundreds of current and former military members, women and men, shared their stories of sexual harassment, assault, and fears of retaliation under the social media #IamVanessaGuillen and #IamVanessa. Stories like Trista's, who was in her first week of tech school when she went to a birthday party for a fellow airman where she was drugged and sexually assaulted. Trista and her assailants all received the same punishment, a letter of reprimand for underage drinking. Stories like Crystal, who joined the Navy at age 19. On her first deployment, she was repeatedly catcalled. When Crystal reported the sexual harassment to a SHARP official, she asked that it be kept confidential, but her request was not honored. After the SHARP told one of her supervisors, the harassment got worse, and her commander told Crystal that she needed to, quote, grow up. But the abuse didn't stop, and instead, it turned physical. The SHARP official discouraged her from reporting it, saying that she should ask herself, Is it worth it? Crystal reported the assault anyway, but her assailants were given a slap on the wrist, and one was even promoted. And stories like Tyler's, who was an Ordnance Marine and newly open about his sexuality. A respected staff sergeant would tease him about it in front of other Marines, but also offered to serve as his mentor. This mentorship continued until the staff sergeant sexually assaulted Tyler. Tyler confided in a fellow Marine who suggested that Tyler keep his mouth shut about the incident because he thought the leadership would defend the staff sergeant while Tyler's career would be cut short. Tyler took the advice, kept silent, and ultimately transferred to the Army. These stories and the thousands more provided the catalyst for grassroots movements combating sexual harassment and assault in the military to spring up across social media. Rallies and vigils were held in Specialist Guillen's name to promote awareness and demand reform. The Coast Guard is outside this committee's jurisdiction, but the cultural rot is the same. Recently, Sarah Faulkner, the Coast Guard's first female elite rescue swimmer, spoke out against the extreme hostility and debasing abuse she endured throughout her distinguished career of some 20 years. She has also become a rallying cry for other women and men in the Coast Guard, as dozens more have come forward to share their stories of harassment and assault, despite Coast Guard leadership pressuring them not to speak out, or even post support online for Sarah and her colleagues, who were also interviewed. In the McClatchy 5-part investigative series that was printed recently in 29 daily newspapers in 14 states. Service members everywhere have bravely raised their voices to demand accountability, to call out their perpetrators, and demand change now. Their voices are a warning to those who deny the problem, who glorify a culture not of honor, duty, and respect, but a culture imbued with misogyny and reticence to change. And this is my warning. Sexual harassment, sexual assault, retaliation are never acceptable. Find solutions, fix problems, get out of the way, because as John Lewis would call us to do, then get in the way. We will not continue to lose soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines because of the sexual harassment is one of the most pervasive and degrading facts of military life, unquote. Now, this is a quote from a female service member in a story in the Washington Post in 1980. That was 40 years ago. Little has changed in those 40 years, except we have thrown a lot of money at this problem. I estimate it's close to $1 billion now. And what do we have to show for it? Well, we're going to explore that today. I've spent 10 years on this issue. I don't take any pride in the numbers going down or going up, because frankly, not much has changed. For all that we have done, not much has changed. We haven't fixed it. And until we get very serious about this, nothing is going to change. I want to thank the panels that are here today, and we will be hearing from you shortly. Before we introduce the first panel, let me introduce Ranking Member Kelly for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairwoman Spear, and thank you for holding this important hearing on this important topic today. Thank you to our panelists today for coming in and sharing your findings. I think it's vitally important that we understand completely any positive or negative trends across DoD and down at Fort Hood. And I think both panels today will help us get perspective on that. Sexual harassment is a scourge across society, rooted in ignorance and disrespect that has no place in our military. When young women, men, and women put up their hand and swear the oath to protect our Constitution and country, they do it with the understanding, belief that they protect us and that we will protect them. We will protect their dignity, honor their sacrifice, recognize and defend their professionalism. Sexual harassment, like any exploitation or maltreatment, undermines that commitment and dishonors the sacrifices they make for each and every one of us in this nation. When I was a company, battalion, brigade commander in the Army, I dealt with sexual harassment in my formations. And it pained me to see all too often young female soldiers disrespected and sometimes exploited just because of their gender. I learned that the only way to counter this insidious threat was quick and decisive action at every level in the chain of command and fighting to establish a culture of intolerance for sexual harassment. Sexual harassment demeans the service of these victims who are more professional, capable, and committed than those who seek to victimize them. And while true that sexual harassment is a societal problem, that doesn't mean we can accept any lesser levels of harassment in the military and call it a victory. The military is better than that, grounded in common values that have no place for harassment, disrespect, or exploitation of other service members or anyone outside of the service for that matter. Any level of sexual harassment is unacceptable. Reporting may be trending favorably, and that is vitally important so leaders can illuminate and eradicate problems. And prevention and response may be improving, but any level of harassment is too much. We need to find creative ways for educating and empowering leaders at all levels and our most valuable vulnerable populations of service members to shape culture of intolerance and set conditions for effective prevention and response at all levels. I'm particularly interested in hearing from our panelists any ideas for how we can make that happen, how we can make institutional change across DoD because our service members deserve our full attention and every effort we can muster to counter the corrosive impact of any level of sexual harassment. I think it has to be personal. It has to be not in my Army, not in my Navy, not in my Coast Guard, which we don't have, but it's just still not in my Air Force, not in my Marine Corps. And that has got to permeate through every senior leader, every senior non-commissioned officer from the sergeant major of each of those services on down. And we have to make sure that we won't tolerate it from anyone, not in my Army, not in my DoD. Thank you again to our panelists. I look forward to a productive discussion today. Thanks again, Chairwoman Spear, for calling this hearing, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Each witness will have the opportunity to present his or her testimony, and each member will have an opportunity to question the witnesses for 5 minutes. We respectfully ask the witnesses to summarize their testimony in 5 minutes or less. Your written comments and statements will be made part of the hearing record. I ask unanimous consent that non-subcommittee members be allowed to participate and ask questions after the subcommittee members have had the opportunity to ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. There are also members of the House who are here who are not members of the Armed Services Committee. I would ask that they too have the opportunity to ask questions after the subcommittee members. Without objection, so ordered. Let me now welcome our first panel, Dr. Nate Galbraith, the Deputy Director of Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office, SAPRO, at the U.S. Department of Defense. And we will then hear from Colonel Patrick Wempe, Command Inspector General, U.S. Armed Forces Command, FORSCOM. Thank you very much. You may begin.
Madam Chair Spear, Ranking Member Kelly, members of the subcommittee, and other members, good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. For the last 3 decades, I've committed my life to supporting and caring for child victims and adult victims of violent crime. Since 2007, my efforts have focused on prevention and response to sexual assault. I wish that circumstances were different and that we were not here to discuss the loss of a service member, a soldier, a daughter. Even with my 30 years investigating violent crime, supporting victims, and counseling the wounded, nothing prepares one for situations like this. The murder of Specialist Vanessa Guillen has touched us all in some way, but no one feels the loss more than her family. I can only hope that the groundswell of support and love and compassion and even inspiration that's come from about in the last few weeks in Vanessa's name can bring some comfort for those that loved and knew her. Nadie debería sufrir lo que esta familia ha sufrido, which for the record means that no one should suffer what this family has suffered. My organization, the Department of Defense Sexual Assault Prevention Response Office, or SAPRO, establishes policy and conducts oversight on efforts to assist victims of sexual assault, encourage greater reporting, empower survivors to recover, and prevent the crime. While harassment policy, criminal investigation, and the military justice system fall outside my portfolio, we are keenly aware of how these issues play a critical role in our work to prevent and respond to sexual assault, and to allow those who choose to make a report to do so without fear of retaliation. Although more work remains, many of our efforts have resulted in certain progress. As many of you know, the department has two key metrics in the sexual assault program. First, estimated prevalence, or how often the crime occurs, is a number we want to go down. And second, the number of reports we want to go up, which means that more victims are coming forward to connect with care and support services, as well as aid our efforts to hold offenders appropriately accountable. The data tells us that the estimated prevalence rates of sexual assault in the Department of Defense have decreased by over a third in the past 14 years, and reporting of sexual assault is 4 times what it was in 2006. However, in our most recent active duty survey in 2018, we saw an increase in the prevalence of sexual assault for women. In addition, in that year, about 24% of women and 6% of men on active duty indicated experiencing behavior consistent with sexual harassment in the year before being surveyed. We know we must do more. Fear of retaliation complicates and degrades our efforts to encourage greater reporting of misconduct and connect service members with restorative care. While not all behaviors perceived to be retaliatory by someone constitute retaliation that is actionable, all behaviors, actionable or not, gravely undermine our efforts in this space and are incongruent with our expectations for dignity and respect. To be blunt, such behaviors are absolutely unacceptable and have no place in a military that is striving for greater dignity, respect, and inclusion for all. In sum, achieving and sustaining progress requires continuous institutional examination, reflection, and evolution. We acknowledge the gap between where we are now and where the department desires to be. We are committed to working towards lasting, impactful cultural change. Again, thank you for your commitment and support to the men and women who serve our nation, and I look forward to your questions.
Colonel Wimpy.
Madam Chair, Ranking Member Kelly, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, good morning. As the Inspector General for Army Forces Command, or FORSCOM, I appreciate the invitation to share information and insights from our inspection of the SHARP program and command climate conducted at Fort Hood, Texas from June 29th to July 3rd, 2020. Let me begin by expressing my sincerest condolences to the Guillen family. As a soldier and as a father, I cannot fathom the acute sorrow and grief that they are feeling over the loss of their daughter and their sister. What happened to Vanessa is tragic and should never happen to a daughter, a sister, or to a soldier. You have my profound sympathy. Our IG team serves as the eyes and ears of our commanding general, General Michael Garrett. To meet these expectations, we interact with members of the FORSCOM community in a variety of ways at all levels and on myriad topics. In our role as inspectors, we look at our organizations and programs to assess them against existing guidance. We also assess organizational climate to identify trends and systemic factors affecting our units and our people. Our assessments inform FORSCOM leader actions and decision-making. On June 27, 2020, General Garrett directed me to lead an inspection of the SHARP program and command climate at Fort Hood. General Garrett's intent was consistent with this type of short notice inspection to as quickly and accurately as possible identify any critical issues, to help Fort Hood leaders understand the strengths and weaknesses of their SHARP program and the installation environment, and to recommend specific actions to make improvements. 6 personnel from the FORSCOM IG conducted the inspection, augmented by a SHARP trainer and a Special Victim Counsel from 18th Airborne Corps at Fort Bragg. Our inspection methodology included a written survey of over 225 soldiers from 12 battalions and 6 brigades. We conducted 14 small group sensing sessions and command team interviews with 4 battalions and 2 brigades, gathering inputs from nearly 200 soldiers and leaders. Additionally, we conducted 16 sessions with SHARP program personnel from company to corps level. In all, we had touch points with nearly 450 personnel from across Fort Hood. Our inspection was not able to fully incorporate Specialist Guillen's unit, the 3rd Cavalry Regiment. We were scheduled to complete the inspection of the unit on July 1st. However, the tragic developments in the Specialist Guillen case the evening prior and very early that morning caused us to reconsider our plan. I advised, and General Garrett concurred, that due to those developments' impacts on the soldiers of the 3CR, we should not complete the inspection of the unit at that time. Though we believe our findings reflect the SHARP program and command climate across Fort Hood, we acknowledge that conditions within the 3CR could differ somewhat from those observed for the rest of the post. Therefore, General Garrett directed that our team return to Fort Hood on July 27th and 28th to complete our inspection of the 3CR. Our team, led this time by my deputy and our IG Sergeant Major, is returning from Fort Hood today and will continue the analysis of the collected data upon their return. At Fort Hood, we observed a SHARP program needing to improve in certain areas, but one which units generally execute to standard. We observed consistent demonstration of program knowledge and awareness of reporting procedures. Importantly, most soldiers said they would report if sexually harassed. Most would report if sexually assaulted, and nearly all said that leaders take reports of sexual harassment and assault seriously. Our team did identify areas needing improvement. A few soldiers indicated a hesitancy to report SHARP incidents for several disparate reasons. Some soldiers expressed that junior leaders in particular lacked the practical experience to respond to a sexual harassment or assault incident. Extended hiring timelines for new SHARP program personnel can result in episodically unfilled positions. Finally, some soldiers indicated that the SHARP training they receive is repetitious and unimaginative. Our team made several recommendations to improve the SHARP program and reinforce soldiers' trust in the process and in the chain of command. Fort Hood leaders were receptive and committed to making the necessary changes to address identified shortfalls. In conclusion, no single inspection can be definitive. We believe our inspection results provide an accurate assessment of the SHARP program and climate at Fort Hood. While differences may exist in individual units, Fort Hood overall is meeting the standards prescribed by Army regulations and policies, and the FORSCOM team is committed to improvements. Again, I appreciate the subcommittee's invitation to appear today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Colonel. I yield myself 5 minutes. Dr. Galbraith, we have spent many, many hours together over the last 8 or 10 years. I have a great deal of respect for you. I am deeply troubled, however, by the statement you made in your prepared remarks, in which you said, estimated prevalence rates of sexual assault in the Department of Defense have decreased by over 1/3 in the past 14 years. So I pulled the figures. In fiscal year 2002, for service women, the prevalence rate was 24%. In 2006, the year you quoted, it was 34%. In 2010, it was 21%. In 2014, it was 21.4%. In 2016, it was 21.4%. In 2018, it was 24.2%. So if you look at the data, it hasn't gotten better. You, I fear, plucked this high watermark to make the case that somehow we're doing better, when in fact we aren't doing any better. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, ma'am. I would agree with you that the rates that you quoted for sexual harassment have not changed. The data that I was citing in my prepared statement were for rates of sexual assault over the past 14 years, and we have seen decreases in the prevalence of those. But you're absolutely right. There is no decrease in the prevalence of sexual harassment that we've seen sustained over time.
And you're saying if I went back to look at the sexual assault data, we're not going to see a similar listing of data that it has dramatically decreased?
It has decreased, ma'am, yes.
All right, I'm going to look that up, and
Yes, please.
before the hearing's over, we'll get back to it. So the inspection at Fort Hood found that survey respondents did not trust their immediate supervisors to handle a sexual harassment or sexual assault incident. Junior supervisors also reported that they themselves did not feel equipped to handle an incident despite training. Your report also indicates that we need to create a focus on this. What do we need to do?
Everyone has to understand the message that sexual assault, sexual harassment aren't tolerated, but it's more than that. We're not born with the skills to necessarily understand what's acceptable and what's not acceptable when we deal with people on an everyday basis. Leaders aren't necessarily born with these skills, and followers aren't necessarily born with these skills to be able to confront people productively, but yet have rational discussions about what is offensive to them. We bring people in from the service from a wide variety of backgrounds. So for that purpose, leaders absolutely need the tools to be able to detect what problems that they have in their units. And through that, we have been revising our climate surveys to help them really identify those topics that are challenging for leaders and to move the needle. In addition to that, our junior supervisors, our newest people who see our folks at greatest risk for sexual assault and sexual harassment every day, they also need those skills to be able to understand what sexual harassment looks like, how to shut it down, and how to encourage everyone to participate in a unit that is and grow respect and dignity and inclusion. In addition to that, we have
Actually,
to from our,
Doctor, I'm going to have to leave
ma'am.
it there because I would like to ask a question of Colonel Wimpy. Colonel, we talked last night, and you indicated to me that you had these listening sessions and talked to over 223 service members. Is that correct? And the service members were mixed in terms of gender, correct?
That is correct, Madam Chair.
So, as we said last night, to get a real fulsome evaluation would require separating out the women so they could talk with a sense of an ability to talk freely without having it create retaliatory actions. Do you recognize that that might have been a better purpose, a better way of handling it?
Madam Chair, I certainly acknowledge the point. What gave us confidence that we were getting good inputs from all soldiers in those sensing sessions was the very good alignment with the results we got from the anonymous surveys, which were entirely anonymous. And so the results were consistent on trust in the chain of command and willingness to report between the anonymous surveys and the information that we were hearing soldiers in sensing sessions. And so I absolutely acknowledge the point of the value of the gender-specific sensing sessions. In this case, there was good correlation between the subjective information we got and the survey information.
Well, you also said that 18 of the 52 women surveyed, more than a third, reported being sexually harassed. But why doesn't your data report include the data on any gender-specific way so that we can look at how female soldiers feel as compared to male soldiers?
The inspection report that we provided was actually provided to General Garrett, which is our norm. We provide it to our commander who directs us to do the inspections. And in this case, the inspection was really focused on the broader climate at Fort Hood and their execution of the SHARP program at Fort Hood. And we needed to provide him some answers fairly quickly so he would know if there was an immediate problem that needed to be addressed immediately at Fort Hood. And so our inspection report really focused on the major points that we thought were important. The level of trust in their leadership, which was high, 94% based on the survey. Willingness to report, which although still not 100%, and we still have challenges there, the willingness to report both assault and harassment incidents was also high, 86% and 87% respectively. And so based on the survey we did and the subjective information and anecdotal information that we got from soldiers that we talked to them, we felt that for the purposes of this inspection, that immediate initial look at Fort Hood and their program, we felt that answered the immediate questions that needed to be answered. We don't necessarily promote our inspection report as the definitive answer.
All right, thank you, Colonel. My time has expired. Ranking Member Kelly.
Thank you again, Chairwoman Spear. I want to talk just a little bit. It sounds like that there is a lot of confidence at Fort Hood in leaders who are at the company and higher level, and that any amount of dissatisfaction is with those at the lieutenant platoon level or at squad level or at some lower level, the junior leaders. I think it's important for people to understand that in perspective. A second lieutenant probably has 6 months of experience in the Army or in the Navy, an ensign in that case. But they're coming from a culture, and we like to always focus on our service academies, but I would say that probably 80% of our officers are commissioned from services outside of the academy, if not a greater number, and most of them come from colleges and universities and ROTC. There are exceptions. You have some coming from OCS. I would also state that most of the issues are with soldiers who have been in for less than 2 years, so they have brought a culture with them. I see our senior leadership, that's General McConville, General Garrett, who I know and is a superb leader. I see a much greater focus across DoD from the senior level leadership where they are no longer giving lip service. Do you see that, Colonel Wimpy or Dr. Galbraith, where our senior leadership, our senior enlisted leaders are pushing down, we will not tolerate? Do you see that in application?
As a matter of fact, I do. I regularly train individuals in the ranks of 05 to 06, E7 to E9, and also senior GS civilians, ranks 13 to GS 13 to 15. And the changes that I've seen over the past 10 years are substantive, that the fluency, their understanding of the problem of sexual assault is increased substantially. They could probably use a little bit more help with sexual harassment and understanding what to do there, but yes, I've seen a great change.
And which brings me to my next point. We need to do a better job of the PMSs, the primary military specialist, or the colonel who is in charge of our ROTC programs. We need to do a better job in our selection of drill instructors or people who are responsible for these young men and women who come into our service. I'm telling you, we've got to teach it from day one. We've got to let them know that it will not be tolerated in our Army. So I just ask that you refocus your efforts because our problems have changed over time. I'm not saying that they've gone away, they have changed. They went from the senior leadership endorsing, tailhook, other examples, to now it's at the junior, the people coming in, bringing their culture with them. And I will say the only way to eradicate that problem is to send PMSs to our colleges and universities, which most people come, is to, at basic training, our drill instructors who teach from day one. That means more women. That means more minorities. That means in those positions. They used to be looked at, if you got a PMS, that was not a good assignment. It may be the end of your career. We need to change that dynamic so that when you get a PMS job, it means the senior leadership of the Army trusts you the most to bring in our most crucial asset, our individuals. Tell me what you think about that, Colonel Wimpy.
Congressman, I'll speak to what we saw in terms of awareness and the focus on the issue. I'll speak to what we saw at Fort Hood during the inspection. As I mentioned, the trust, as expressed to us, both through survey and through the actual discussions, the trust in the leaders was high. The the awareness and the emphasis on the challenge of SHARP and the problems that presented, that awareness was very high. Soldiers were very conversant, very aware of the SHARP program, the processes, their opportunities to report, and their mechanisms to report. So what we took away from that was that there was a priority on SHARP at Fort Hood. The concern is expressed to us by soldiers with those junior level leaders, as they expressed it to us, was not one of trust per se. It was that they trusted their leaders to take it seriously, but those junior leaders may not have either the life experience or the military experience to deal with the situation as it was presented to them. And so our recommendation to get at that issue as expressed to us was really to focus some training on that first line supervisor, that junior leader, and the DoD initiative sounds like it is addressing that challenge.
And Colonel Wimpy, just very quickly with the few seconds that I have left, what that means is we have the greatest NCO Corps in the world. We are the greatest military in the world because of our non-commissioned officers. And I can tell you an E6 has adequate experience and life experiences. So maybe we need to shift the focus and we need to train sergeants. We need to train first sergeants, platoon sergeants, or the equivalent in the Navy. Those guys have the life experience and they're at the levels where they can impact that. They've got to trust their squad leaders, platoon sergeants, and on up. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Ms. Davis, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I express, as well as my colleagues, condolences to the family of Specialist Galima and others. You know, I've been working with this as well for many, many years, and I remember some of the initial work that we did, and especially trying to create what became the Special Victims Council and Advocate. And that seemed to be something that, if nothing else, gave the victims the confidence that there was somebody there for them. Because I think what we heard was they felt extremely alone. Nobody would listen, and they really didn't believe that anybody cared. So that made some difference, but we're still struggling, aren't we? And we were often told, you know, you changed 9, major laws in regard to this, or 12, whatever the number was. People told us, wait, sit back, let us let this change things, and we're still at this. I remember, and I checked the date again because it was June 14th of 2013 when General Morrison in Australia told people, if you've got some sexist problems or issues, get out, and get out now. And that resonated with us here too, because we believed that maybe the messages are not strong enough from our leaders. And quite honestly, we didn't hear that, although I have to say that I had great respect for many of the generals that we were working with at that time. But you're citing the junior level folks. So that means we've got to look at the promotions. What is the climate under which they were working that they created in their units? And I know we've looked at this, we've talked about it, but somehow or other, that's not getting through. But I also check back to see, okay, so what's happening with Australia today? Are they doing a lot better than we are? And if you want to check that article, they're not, actually. And they're suggesting that the media is still acting on the belief that, quote, boys will be boys, and that the system is not going to change very much. I hope we're better than that, but I worry that as we continue to come back, that's not always the case. I'm pleased that you cited the fact that women are saying that they have more trust in some of their leaders and leaders that have gone further in the services. And I've heard that as well, especially in the Navy, because I've asked it a lot. But I've always been concerned that somehow when it comes to promotions that we're not looking at the right things. And we've got to do that. That's very important. So I wanted to go back and just very quickly, because I know my time is running out. Colonel Wimpy, are you planning to go back to Fort Hood and conduct an inspection of the unit of Specialist Guillian's unit, the 3rd Cavalry Regiment as well? Do we need to know more about that?
Congresswoman, we actually did send a team back this week, and in the last 2 days, they have been inspecting the 3CR unit, Specialist Guillian's unit, because we weren't able to inspect it when we were down there the first time in late June and early July. I think you can appreciate in this forum in particular, IGs operate by fairly strict regulations regarding the confidentiality that we receive, and we do that to protect soldiers and protect units because we need them to talk to us, and we have to protect them when they do. So it wouldn't be appropriate to talk details about 3CR specifically today, or at least great details, but we did return and do the inspection the last 2 days. The initial feedback that I got from our inspection team, led by my deputy, who is a very experienced IG, is that what they saw within 3CR was very well aligned with what we saw with the remainder of the post when we were down there the first time. Some slight variations in specific in the way they answered it, but no significant variances from what we saw. And just as importantly, they felt like they had very transparent and honest input from the soldiers in the sensing sessions they did with them.
Okay, thank you. My time is almost up. I was going to ask, and I'm sure others will, about the AWOL process and some specifics around that, because we had concerns about that at the last hearing. Thank you very much.
Mr. Berman, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the hearing. Thanks for the subject, because the youth of our country is our future, period. I'd like you to just take this question for the record, unless you know it right off the top of your head. What percentage of the age-eligible youth, young people, enlist or seek to enlist in the military today? What percentage? And if you don't have it, that's fine. Take it for the record.
I'm sorry, sir, I don't have that.
Good. Take it for the record. And with that, I yield the rest of my time to Mr. Turner.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. When the story of Vanessa Guillen broke, my heart sank, because in my community, 13 years ago, the story was very similar. Maria Lauterbach came up missing. Stories began to circulate of the sexual assault that she had reported. The accused became the primary suspect, and her body was ultimately found in his backyard, where he had murdered her and burned her body. In this instance, with Vanessa, my heart sank, because once again, the question arises, has the military done anything wrong? In this instance, with Maria Lauterbach, there were things that really went wrong that we knew needed to be addressed. And I think our oversight, and Colonel Wimpy, it's so important in this investigation, that we need to look, what has DoD done, what did we know, what were we not doing, and what did we not do correctly? It's been my honor to work with Congresswoman Susan Davis on this issue. As a result of Maria Lauterbach's death, I got involved in this, worked with Susan Davis and others. We gave victims the ability to do an expedited transfer. We gave, as Congresswoman Davis was saying, victims their own counsel, and even standing in court, so the victims can have their own legal representation to guide them through this. We divided up our whole task into 3 categories. Prevention. How do we make certain that we lessen sexual assault and sexual harassment? Protection. How do we ensure that victims themselves have the tools that they need? And then prosecution, ensuring that those who perpetrate these crimes are held accountable. Now, surely we can tell that we're falling short. Dr. Galbraith, I have one question for you, though, to start, and that is, I fear that when we make it a gender issue, that we actually lessen the overall impact of sexual assault on men in the military. Now, you gave the percentages, and it's my understanding, Dr. Galbraith, that actually more men are assaulted than women.
Sir, that was the case up through 2016. 2018 was the first year that we saw fewer men sexually assaulted as far as numbers go than women.
Well, what I find interesting about the percentages and the extent is that when we talk about afraid to report, there's afraid to report in the system and retaliation, then there's also cultural. And so what are we doing to address this issue of assuring that, that people will feel that they can come forward? When Congresswoman Davis and I were at the Marine Commandant's residence, he was telling us what he was doing on sexual assault, but there was an officer, female, at the table who during the discussion said she herself would feel afraid to report. And that, of course, means that everybody's a victim, right? Even if you're not a victim of sexual assault, but if you believe that if you are assaulted, that that it's not worth it to come forward, that you're still a victim of the system. Dr. Galbraith, tell me what you're doing in this regard.
Absolutely. We're making it very clear from the very highest levels of leadership on down that encouraging people to come forward and report is much more than just saying make a report. We have to have systems that protect the confidentiality of people, and with restricted reporting, that's something that we did that actually brings in many, many more people than we ever recognized would come in to make a report just by offering them that confidential ability. In addition to that, we have to have highly trained people that when people do walk in the door, they're heard, they're respected, and they're assisted in the way that they want to. And then we have to have services that appeal to people, that really do make a difference in their lives.
With respect to harassment and the increase in reporting, as we try to shift our culture, wouldn't we want more reporting? Wouldn't we want people to be more critical of the environment that they're working in so that we'd have the ability for intervention? Because harassment can so easily translate into encouraging an environment that permits sexual assault.
Yes, sir. The policies that we put in place for sexual assault in 2006 quadrupled the number of service members that make a report every year now. That being said, we could do the same for sexual harassment.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank the gentleman. I really think that being accurate is really important on this issue. So I've had the staff give me the stats on sexual assault in the military since 2006. In 2006, it was 6.8% for women. In 2010, it was 4.4%. In 2012, it was 6.1%. In 2014, it was 4.9%. In 2016, it was 4.3%. In 2018, it was 6.2%. So it was 6.8% in 2006. It was 6.2% in 2018. That is not a third less. If what you are doing is combining women and men in the military to get that reduction of 1/3, I don't think that is fair. Now, for men, it went from 1.8% to 0.7% from 2006 to 2018. I think it's really important to be accurate and fair and not let the stats twist the truth. With that, Mr. Cisneros, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank our panel for being here today. I, too, was very disturbed by Vanessa Guillon's death, having lost a sister at a young age as well. It's something that's devastating for a family. And with that, I'll get right to my questions. Reportedly, for sexual assault and sexual harassment, the number of court martials and NJP stayed about steady for 2018 and 2019, while the numbers of administrative actions rose, indicating in some instances commanders were choosing to either slap perpetrators on the wrist or unload them from the service rather than take appropriate disciplinary action. What can we do to ensure that commanders are properly investigating and responding to sexual assault, sexual harassment allegations?
Sir, for sexual assault, no commanders are allowed to investigate that crime. All allegations of sexual assault are required to be provided to the military criminal investigative organizations, OSI, CID, and NCIS. And that's been the department's policy since about 2006. For sexual harassment, when formal reports are made, you are correct that investigations are conducted at the command level. I think the best thing that's happened with that, though, is to get to ensure that the General Court-Martial convening authority over that individual command is notified of that formal harassment complaint, which means that it's in the light of day and other people's eyes are on it than just the command.
So the reports that are restricted, where survivors confidentially disclose an assault without starting an official investigation, saw a 17% increase from last year with 2,126 reports. Do you feel that the increase in restricted reports demonstrates a lack of faith in the chain of command?
Actually, sir, I believe it's the exact opposite. Our restricted reporters come forward because they see it as a viable way to protect their confidentiality. And as a matter of fact, we believe that any report is a good report from a standpoint of allowing our service members to get the care and the help that they need.
So if they had faith in the chain of command, why wouldn't they make it an official report?
Sir, our policy recognizes that reporting a sexual assault is a deeply personal decision, and so we empower everyone to make the decision that's right for them. We've got to respect that for some people, making a report will never be right. But for others, we give them every opportunity to come forward, and in addition to that, as a restricted reporter, you have the opportunity to convert your report to unrestricted and participate. And about a quarter of people do that every year. In addition to that, we've also employed the Catch a Serial Offender program for restricted reporters, which allows them to submit their name of their offender into a system, and if there's a match, then we contact them back and see if they'd like to participate in the justice system.
So sexual assault appears to be more prevalent among junior service members relatively new to the military. So what preventive efforts are in place to prepare leaders at all levels to better reach our youngest service members who are most at risk? And I believe that's part of what Colonel Wimpke was talking about. But how are we reaching our young junior personnel who are new to the military and to let them know that this is not acceptable?
Absolutely. So we have a variety of ways that we go after this issue. At first of all, within 14 days of you joining the military, you're informed about the Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Program. That's at basic training. Then when you go to your advanced school, you get additional information about what's acceptable and what's not as far as behavior goes. In addition to that, we've taken a number of different efforts since May of 2019 to ensure that our junior leaders and our first-line supervisors will have the skill to be able to address this behavior when they see it and shut it down. In addition to that, we are also providing commanders with new revised climate surveys that allow them to detect and then take action on challenges within their unit to protect those folks that are junior.
So is this training provided on an annual basis as well, while they're at their commands?
There is annual training, yes. Basic training is not annual, it's when you first come in.
Well, I know, but that's why I'm asking. Is there refresher training done every year?
Yes, sir.
Right. So, look, we heard from Vanessa Guillon's family. We hear from so many other individuals that she came forward and told her family members who she trusted that she was being sexually assaulted and didn't feel comfortable reporting that to her chain of command. And that's not uncommon, and we've heard that so many times here. We need to do something to change that. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I too share your reluctance in embracing restrictive reporting. I think it sends a message to the soldiers, don't rock the boat. Let's just give you the health care you need, and let's move forward. Let's just put this behind us. So I really am not a fan of it, but it is in the system today. I now yield 5 minutes to Ms. Escobar.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for another hearing about this issue. Thank you for your continued leadership and your partnership. I'm very, very grateful for it. To our witnesses in our panel, thank you for being here. All of us have been shocked and horrified about the news of Vanessa Guillen, and once again, my sincerest condolences to her family. Briefly, Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 letters from the Texas legislature calling on the U.S. Congress to investigate Specialist Vanessa Guillen's tragic disappearance and produce findings with utmost transparency. The first from the Texas House Women's Health Caucus, the second from the Texas Senate Hispanic Caucus.
Without objection?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I, too, have called on Congress for an investigation along with our chairwoman. Gentlemen, right after, as the chairwoman mentioned, right after the discovery of Vanessa Guillen's murder and as the brutal details became public, you saw women all over the country talking about their experiences on social media and on Zoom conversations. I had my own conversations at home, and one of really an alarming component of the conversation that I had with one soldier, she talked about the incredible frustration that she and her colleagues have in knowing that sexual assaults are not either fully investigated or they feel that there's not justice attached to those investigations. And so she said, why bother reporting sexual harassment if the results with regard to sexual assault are so terrible? And she said, in fact, that she's been deployed, and she said that she knew that there was basically a war outside the wire that she was prepared for, but there was one inside the wire she was not prepared for, just for context. So, Colonel Wempe, I want to ask you specifically, the FORSCOM IG report indicates that most soldiers responded that they would report assaults, that 86% would report assaults. However, the same investigation shows that just 50% of those who were assaulted in the last year actually reported it. I didn't see that your recommendation addressed this issue. Why not? And also, how should DoD and SHARP address this disparity?
Congresswoman, if I could just make a point to clarify, what we did was an inspection rather than an investigation, which in the IG realm are 2 distinctly different things. So for the inspection that we did, it did indicate that only 50% of those that had been assaulted reported, but yet 86% indicated that if they were reported, or if they were assaulted, they would report. I think the statistic is a little bit misleading because it was such a small sample size for those that had been assaulted. There were 4 of that survey group that had been assaulted, and 2 of those had reported. So it was a very small sample size, and because it was an anonymous survey, we weren't able to dig into those cases specifically as to why or why not they didn't report. More broadly, and I think it is a very important point, even though 86% in the case of sexual assault indicated that they would report, and 87% indicated that they had reported if they had been a victim. And so we make some assessments based on that. That in no way discredits the story or the experience of an individual soldier, because we know the incidents occur, and we know that not everybody reports. So even though our assessments indicate the propensity to report is very high, that in no way detracts from those that choose not to report for whatever reason. In terms of that difference between a very high level of trust and command, but a still high but lesser level of those willing to report either assess harassment or assault, in the sensing sessions, we really tried to understand why that was, why there would be that disparity between the trust level and the willingness to report. And what we found, what soldiers told us, it broke down into a number of different reasons. Deeply personal decision that is being made by somebody who has experienced a significant event. And there wasn't any one reason of those that stood out to us as to why they would not report if they had experienced an incident.
Colonel, and just super quickly, have any of the recommendations you made been adopted?
We had. Congresswoman, they're doing planning down there already in terms of how to implement, particularly some of the training recommendations that we made. Additionally, some of the other programmatic recommendations that we made about the processing of new SHARP program personnel, our team actually looked into that earlier this week while they were down there for the revisit. And it appears that our team did not see a specific reason for a backlog in the processing. It was just a process that is very deliberate and very, very careful about who ultimately goes into those SHARP program positions.
Colonel, I'm out of time. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Escobar. Ms. Loria, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I would just like to start by saying that, I entered the military in July 1st, 1993. And I feel like in all those years since then, and in the 20 years I served, very little has actually changed in what is happening. You talk over and over again about the programs you've implemented. I lived through that. I lived through those changes, the implementation, and all of them. But I truly feel like we actually have to do something differently. And I applaud Chairwoman Spear for an effort that she put into this year's NDAA that Ms. Sherrill and I, also a Naval Academy graduate, supported. And we would like to look at how that type of change of an independent prosecutor or something in addition to supplement, to help with this problem with the chain of command, can help with this situation in the future and people's ability to report. And I would like to yield the remainder of my time to Ms. Sherrill.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Luria. I couldn't agree more. It feels like many of the issues that I heard about in 1990 when I was 18 years old and entered the academy, we are still talking about today. And I'd like to mention some things. I'm going to have to head down to the floor after this, so I do want to quickly say thank you so much to Ms. Delgadio for coming today. She is a from my state of New Jersey. She has stood up for women throughout New Jersey for many years now, and now I'm proud that she's come to stand for women throughout the nation. So thank you so much for coming today. Something that Chairwoman Spear said that has me very concerned is in your finding, about 18 of the roughly 50 women reported being sexually harassed. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, Congresswoman.
And you said that the majority of women in your survey would report this. They told you they would report sexual or harassment. Is that correct?
Yes, that is also correct.
And so have there been reports from over 1/3 of the women on the base that they have been sexually harassed? Is that what the reporting has told us?
Congresswoman, I would have to take that for the record. We did not look at the overall reporting percentages or prevalence at Fort Hood as part of our inspection, so I would have to take that for the record.
Could you please take that for the record? Because it occurs to me that that would be a good way to check your survey to determine if, in fact, that women are really feeling free to come forward. And I would suggest that if over 1/3 of the women on Fort Hood are reporting being sexually harassed, that is certainly a real concern of mine and something that really has to have further looking into. I also want to focus on the finding that the SHARP program at Fort Hood is operating to standard. Was that your finding?
Yes, it was.
If that's true, it really leads to serious questions about the usefulness of the Army standard itself, given that if a SHARP program is operating at standard missed the sexual assault and eventual murder of a soldier at Fort Hood, the standard is flawed. So what steps are being taken by the Army to assess that standard itself, and what changes would you recommend?
Congresswoman, our inspection did not look at the actual policies or regulations themselves. We strictly looked at the unit's ability and their level of execution against those standards. I would have to defer to others in terms of any initiatives or movements within the Army to change the standard itself. I do think, however, having said that we didn't look at the specific standards. If the intent of the policies and regulations is to maintain focus on the topic of SHARP and the prevention of incidents and the reporting of incidents, what we saw was in the units that we talked to, we did see a lot of awareness of the topic, a lot of engagement and investment in that topic at all levels of the soldiers that we talk to, and an absolute appreciation of the priority that needs to be placed on it. We did see that. So in that respect, I think the intent of the standards as they pertain to soldiers and how they view SHARP, I think what we saw at Fort Hood indicates that it was having a very good effect, notwithstanding the effect that, or the point that, the broader point that it may not be having the entire effect that we're looking for.
I think maybe our measurements of good effect need to be adjusted. Simply, you know, if we're seeing reporting of over a third of the women being sexually harassed, if we have a murder that took place on Fort Hood, I have grave concerns about how we're measuring success in this instance, and I think we're failing, quite frankly. So my time is up, and I yield back, but thank you so much for your testimony today.
Thank the gentlelady. Colonel, it's true that there is a SHARP program, that people know about the SHARP program, so you were able to check those boxes. But you also, I think, in your report indicated that the, is it the SHARP 360 program? Are you familiar with that? The one where they have an actual facility there, they create a bar, a motor pool, and act out, that wasn't well known to any of the people that, or very few of the people that you actually interviewed. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And we were not aware of it before we got down there. One of the SHARP program people that we interviewed on the first day mentioned it. Our team went and took a look, and our team was very impressed with the platform for SHARP training that facility provides. And the few soldiers that had gone through small group training at that facility spoke very, very well about the facility. But it's absolutely true, it was not well known. Even the existence of the facility
All right.
was
And the
not
SHARP
well
program is online for the most part?
In terms of the regulations and the policies, what that requires of the units, yes, Madam Chair, it was online from what we saw.
Thank you. Ms. Holland, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, thank you for convening today's hearing. As a mother, as an Indigenous woman, and as a proud member of this committee, I'm deeply saddened and disturbed to hear about the loss of Specialist Vanessa Guillen. And I understand I'm not alone in feeling this way. I send my heartfelt condolences to Gloria and Myra, Vanessa's mother and sister, to the men and women in our military communities and our witnesses here today who are also grieving and searching for answers. I, too, wish that circumstances were different and that Congress could have done more sooner to address the pervasive climate of sexual harassment and assault in our military. I hope today's hearing will lead us down a relentless path towards swift military justice reforms, which from my colleagues saying they have waited a long time for these things, and protections for all of our men and women who serve. Colonel Wempe, I understand the Inspector General's inspection at Fort Hood concluded the SHARP program is executed as prescribed and meets Army standards. Yet many military women have come forward to share their own personal stories of sexual harassment and a sexual assault. These women have shared they've been overlooked and silenced. How do you rectify your findings with the real lived experiences of these women? And is there something that's being overlooked?
Congresswoman, the execution of the program to standard, sort of the programmatics of the SHARP program, that was one of the objectives that we looked at. And that was really focused on, are they doing the training? Are they doing the training consistently? What is the level of awareness of soldiers of the SHARP program itself? And all of that was very strong from what we saw with the units that we inspected. Probably more critical for the question may be that the objective of our inspection that also looked at climate, because so much of the climate affects not just whether or not the incidents happen, but what happens after an incident happens. And so we put a lot of focus on that objective, the one of climate. And although it is true that both from the survey information and the subjective information we got from talking to soldiers, trust in the leaders to take it seriously was very high. Trust in the willingness to report was also high. that doesn't preclude the experience of individual soldiers. And we know that incidents are still occurring. I mean, common sense says that, our survey indicated that, and certainly the DoD statistics indicate that. So we know that incidents are still occurring. We know that there is work to do, really focusing, I think, on that 16 or 17% and why they are not reporting and how we can make it more comfortable or easier for them to report. I think that's very important so that we really understand the problem and its scope better than we do now.
I'm just curious, have you personally read any of the Me Too military stories that are out there?
I'm not on social media. I've not read them directly. I've certainly read a lot of the press reporting about those stories that have been on the social media.
Me Too stories are very personal. They're from the women themselves, and I would encourage you to take a look at some of those because I think they'd be very informative. Madam Chair, I yield.
Thank you, Ms. Holland. Mr. Crow, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman, for holding this really important hearing on a critical issue for our military and our young men and women. The military goes to great lengths to instill esprit de corps, to instill culture among its ranks. When I was a young enlisted soldier, my career started when I was in the enlisted ranks as a private. I remember going to basic training. And the amount of time that was spent learning knowledge. You were given this book, and you're told to memorize the Army song, Army history, the great battles in American history. You memorize the ranks, the command structure. You know, it's a reflection of the priorities of the force, where you spend your time. And instruction was broken down by the hour. You know, X number of hours on marksmanship, X number of hours on physical fitness, and where we spend our resources. So with that in mind, I'm concerned that our time and resources still do not adequately reflect the priority and the urgency of this issue. Dr. Galbraith, you said that within 14 days, new recruits are informed about the program, and then when they go to their advanced training, they're provided, quote, additional information about the program. So can you shed some additional light for me as to how many hours of instruction and how much time is spent for these new recruits who get their first exposure to military culture and the priorities of our force to instill in them how critical this issue is?
I don't have that number on me because this is a service equity that they all execute just a bit differently, but it is, once again, there's a substantial amount of time spent. I just don't know what it is per service.
I would think you would want to know that. I mean, you are one of the top leaders in the program that's designed to instill accountability into our force, and I understand that there are some disparities, but this starts from day one.
It does.
And I'm dismayed, to say the least, that you don't know how much time and effort is spent instilling culture and priorities on our recruits from the first day they step off that bus, right? Because when you get yelled at by the drill sergeant,
right,
it's a reflection of the priorities of the force. But we're clearly not doing that with an issue of critical importance that goes to the esprit de corps, the values, the culture, and the morality of our military. So I want, for the record, to get that information from you, and I want to know that this will remain a priority. Dr. Galbraith, can you tell me how many of the SHARP representatives throughout the force, I believe at the GS level, they start at the brigade level, how many of those are women?
The vast majority of them are women. I don't have the exact percentage of what the gender breakdown is, but
So it's over 50%.
that is my understanding.
Okay, vast majority is all that you know. Okay, again, that's a number I would expect you to know, because that's important, because that's also a reflection of the priorities of our force and how we're allocating our resources. And I would expect, as a leader of this organization, that you would have that information, that you would know how many women are out there within our units actually addressing this issue. The last part, question I'd like to make is actually dovetailing on the ranking member, General Kelly's comments about the impact of NCOs, because we've talked a lot about the officer corps, and certainly, the buck stops with the officers. But the NCOs are critical. I could not agree more with General Kelly's comment that if you want to know what's going on in a barracks, if you want to know what's going on during off hours on the weekend, it's our sergeants, our NCOs that know what's going on within the units. And I don't believe that we are adequately training and equipping the NCO Corps through the NCO development system and education system to lead on this issue. So my last statement would actually be a request that we figure out a way to better equip the NCO Corps and use them as kind of our eyes and ears and tools on the front line to address this crisis. So thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Ms. Garcia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for your leadership on this issue and for agreeing to let me to waive in since I do not serve on this committee. And with that said, gentlemen, if I get some of the acronyms wrong, please bear with me because I'm not a member of this committee. But Madam Chair, your leadership on this issue has been consistent, and your support as the member who represents the Guillen family in Houston, I can tell you that they know that you're there with them and that this committee is supportive because not only does the family grieve, Houston grieves, the nation grieves. When we see a march in Houston of 3,000 people in the middle of the heat, but we also see marches across America, about 40 or 50 on one Saturday. This is a topic that's very, very, very concerning to many, many people. I'm going to pick up where my colleague, Representative Merrill, left off. When were these standard or criteria for reviews or inspections, when were those developed? Just quickly, the year.
Congressman, I believe the DoD level standard was last updated in May of 2017, I believe.
2017. So is there a below standard, above standard, or is that the only option?
The policy, both DoD and Army, prescribes what the requirements are for training and for programmatic things.
I know,
so
but for you to decide whether the programs are working is the only option that they meet standard or not standard. Like I'm used to performance reviews. There's above standard, there's below standard, or needs improvement. I mean, they're either standard or not standard.
In our methodology as IGs, it's because we deal with so much subjective information as we receive it from soldiers.
Right.
It is our assessment that we make about whether or not it's meeting the standard it includes some empirical information, but it also includes a lot of subjective information from the soldiers. And so we just make our assessment.
So that is the only option.
That is correct.
Right. Well, because it is disappointing, as Representative Merrill said, that if it is standard, that there would still be about 1/3 or more that are not reporting. And if you look at, especially I looked at the, I also don't understand the difference between a formal complaint and informal complaint on sexual harassment.
In dealing with sexual harassment, specifically, the formal complaint would be one that they would make to the chain of command or
Right.
potentially to a VA, and it would go through the formalized process of an investigation and then whatever.
Well, tell me about informal.
Informal would be the soldier, for timeliness purposes, the ideal is a soldier deals with it immediately and the issue gets remedied immediately.
It wouldn't be that she told her parents. It wouldn't be that she told her sisters. It wouldn't be that she told friends on the base. That's informal, in my view.
Informal in this context from the Army, it would be reaching out to somebody that within the unit or at that institution.
So if she told a member of her unit and her unit was not in the survey, correct?
That survey was just completed with her unit the previous 2 days, and
Right.
the team is returning.
But if she told someone in her unit, that would be informal.
A victim would have the option of making, regardless of who they told, they would have the
Well,
option
sir,
of making
it's a very
formal or
direct
informal.
question. If she did share her story with friends in her unit, is that an informal complaint?
It could be unless she intended it to be a formal complaint. She
Well,
had
we
that
certainly
option.
don't know her intent. She cannot tell us her intent. If she could tell her story, we probably wouldn't have to have this hearing, but unfortunately, she's not with us. So if she told her friends at the unit or someone there on the base, is that an informal complaint?
If she did not express the intent to make it a formal complaint, then that would fall into the,
So you're saying that someone would have to go and say, Sheila, you know what, I was sexually assaulted yesterday, but I don't want to make that an informal complaint? Someone has to consciously say that they want to make it an informal complaint? It seems a little,
the victim has the option of either making it formal
Right.
or informal.
Well-
That's their decision.
well, it's really disturbing to me that the numbers still don't look good. And when I looked at your, I guess it's Appendix F of the report, what did catch my eye is this formal, informal complaint and how it intermixes with your numbers, because then you also have anonymous complaints. So I won't ask you about those, because I'm sure that I'll hear that the victim had to have some conscious level of saying it was anonymous. But I like the Representative Cheryl, think that you all need to rethink your assessments, something other than just standard, because obviously, you know, that doesn't quite meet today's demands. You know, I don't know what the history is of how those were developed, but I think if we're going to look at making change, that's maybe one of the institutional changes that we need to make. Then I want to quickly ask Mr. Galbraith, you mentioned that in response to my colleague that there was a very great number of women that were SHARP officers or program managers.
Sexual assault victim
Right.
advocates.
Are any of those women of color?
Yes, they are.
Do we know
I
about
have
how many?
22,000 sexual assault victim advocates. About 2,500 are full-time members, and some of them are people of color. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Then I want to go back to you, Colonel. You said that you did an inspection, but it's not an investigation because you wanted to make sure that we quickly went in there and saw what's going on at Fort Hood. And you started June 23rd? No, July 27th?
We arrived and began work June 29th at Fort.
June 29th. Now, that's not really in a hurry, is it? Because she went missing April 22nd. I sent a letter of inquiry May 23rd. I visited Fort Hood June 23rd. But yet 4 months later is when you started your inquiry. Does it usually take that long? Because news reports from the very, very beginning mentioned sexual harassment. Her family shared that story from the very, very start. Why did it take so long for y'all to try to go in and look at this snapshot to see what's going on in case you needed to do something?
All right, Ms. Garcia, we're going to have to ask for a very short answer. Because
Okay, great, thank you.
The investigative efforts began immediately, and we were not part of the investigation by CID, so I can't really speak to their timeline or their details.
No, sir, I was asking about yours on sexual harassment.
Our inspection was really to look at the climate at Fort Hood.
But it was
based on all the
General,
concerns that had been
it was
raised.
General Garrett that assigned you that task, correct?
That's correct,
All
Madam
right.
Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Sheila Jackson Lee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, thank you so very much for your stupendous leadership and certainly the opportunity that has been given to women members and men members of the United States Congress to work with you on this extremely important work. Thank you to Congresswoman Davis, who has led this effort, and we have had the opportunity to work with Susan as well. I join my neighbor and dear friend, Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia, who has given stupendous leadership, tragically, to this issue, and my fellow colleague, Congresswoman Escobar. I, too, have come on this committee because of the enormous pain that the whole community the whole state of Texas, and of course now the nation, feels about Vanessa. So my colleague has pointed and focused on some questions that I would like to follow up on, but at the same time, I wanted to make sure that we all saw what kind of vibrant young soldier that the nation lost. This represents a youngster who in high school was the best athlete. There were men who said, I can't believe how athletic, how strong she was, who the minute she graduated from high school on June 9th, she shortly shipped off for basic training. A true patriot and a family who came to America and did all they could for their children, true contributors to the infrastructure of this nation. I think what pains me is that she was missing for 70 days, and of course the gruesome brutality of her murder. And so I want to focus my deepest sympathy to her family and my continued partnership, collaboration with Congresswoman Garcia, and to join on legislation that I think is absolutely imperative. So I want to, though you were, I understand Congressman Spear mentioned another general that was engaged, but I just want to read this sentence into the record, or this paragraph. Army officials say Guyan never reported sexual harassment through official channels. She told her mother near the end that a sergeant had been harassing her. She told her best friend that a soldier had walked in on her in a shower. That is well known throughout Houston. It is very painful. But she wasn't going to file a complaint. She told her mother her superiors would laugh or brush it off if she said something. She bristled at the idea of quitting the Army. She would not violate her oath. And so we have a real problem. My colleague pursued informal. This is not a complete system. If you have young soldiers, male or females, but in this instance saying her superiors would laugh or brush it off, then did your study pierce into, as Congressman Crow said, I think he called them the sergeants and NCOs, did you pierce into, did you try to understand, to break that culture? Did you interview, and out of that report, did you develop policies that do not go to the umbrella, the base commander, but get to the individual NCOs? Because we lost a life because some young soldier, so athletic, thought that they would bristle or that they would laugh it off. That's number one question. I want to get this other one in. I think there was a number that you were able to get everyone, or you thought you reached everyone except 16 to 17%. I just need to get that explained. Leaving that number of people still impacted by sexual harassment means that you've got thousands of soldiers, because we have millions of soldiers that may be impacted by the failure of real policies of dealing with ending sexual harassment. And then the last question would be, you know, it's trending upwards, as I understand. What are we doing to get it to stop trending? But the first question is really, how did you assess or pierce where Vanessa was for her to have relief?
All right. Ms. Jackson Lee has 11 seconds. See if you can fill those.
In the case of our inspection, Congresswoman, we did ask those questions. Again, trust in the leadership indicated to us by soldiers was very high. And then in the sensing sessions and interviews with them, we tried to really bore into why they would not report. And again, a variety of reasons, very personal decisions as to why that wouldn't report. Certainly concern about how they would be perceived by others was one of those various reasons that they indicated they would not report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to join with Congressman Crow to say that we need to deal with the sergeants and NCOs. There has got to be a better culture for young people in the enlisted men and women. I thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I want to thank our two witnesses for your testimony today. I think it's very important as we study this issue to recognize that Colonel Wimpy's investigation was not scientifically based. And you cannot extract from that that it is relevant to the entire force. I think you would agree with that, Dr. Galbraith, correct? Okay. Thank you very much. We'll now have our second panel come forward. Okay. Hearing will come back to order. I now welcome our second panel, Ms. Melissa Bryant, Grassroots Movement, U.S. Army veteran, and Ms. Lucy Del Guadio, who is Grassroots Movement, U.S. Army veteran. Thank you both for being here today. Ms. Bryant, would you like to begin?
July 29th, 2000. I was a 20-year-old cadet stationed at Fort Hood for a few weeks for cadet troop leading training as a part of ROTC. At first, I was intimidated by the sheer expanse that was Fort Hood, amazed that you could drive for miles and miles and still be on post. I was assigned to a military police unit where there was no platoon leader for me to shadow, to learn how to be an officer. So I shadowed the platoon sergeant. I spent time with him and the other soldiers in the platoon in the arms room, on the range, in the motor pool, in the post exchange, joking around, ignoring the occasional overt sexual comments. I just wanted to fit in. Here I was with a silver disc on my cap, a clear sign that I was a cadet and even lower than a private. Laughing off comments made about my physique with junior enlisted soldiers, all because I didn't want to make a scene. It's not like you can pull rank when you're a cadet. There were no women officers in the unit, and the men, while nice guys, were either indifferent or oblivious to the nature of the banter. I imagine this is how Vanessa Guillen felt when she was sexually harassed by someone who outranked her, even when he was also lower enlisted and not in her direct chain of command. Chairwoman Spear, Ranking Member Kelly, distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the servicewomen-led grassroots movement comprised of over 4,000 women and gender-diverse veterans and over 6,500 allies and supporters, we thank you for the opportunity to address the critical issue of sexual harassment and retaliation in the military following the tragic murder of U.S. Army Specialist Vanessa Guillen. Sexual harassment in the military is not only an epidemic of fear, it is a national security risk, systemically degrading the integrity of unit cohesion, thus reducing personnel readiness. It compromises mission and personnel readiness by taking service members out of our combat-ready ranks emotionally, physically, and in Specialist Guillen's case, violently and permanently. It's an issue of power and dominance and has nothing to do with sexual gratification. To add insult to injury, those of us who are lucky enough to survive military sexual trauma, or MST, stemming from permissive and pervasive hostile environments while in the military, face uphill battles with the Department of Veterans Affairs once we take off the uniform and attempt to claim VA compensation and other benefits for post-traumatic stress disorder relating to MST. 1 in 5 women who experienced sexual harassment were also sexually assaulted, giving credence to the hypothesis that a permissive environment for harassment can foster perceived permission for assault by an offender. It was concluded by DoD that sexual harassment is the leading factor affecting the unit climate on sexual assault. The data also show the majority of victims were harassed by someone in their chain of command. And perhaps most stunning, 1,021 formal sexual harassment complaints were investigated in FY19, a 10% increase from FY18. It is a common belief that the rates of reporting in recent years are resultant of ramped-up military education efforts to destigmatize reporting sexual assault in the ranks. However, this rising statistic also begs the question of whether DoD ever had a fully accounted grasp of the broad scope of its harassment problem. Fear of retaliation, as expressed by Specialist Guillen to her family regarding her own sexual harassment, remains a driver for a majority of MST survivors to remain silent. The latest data show 64% of women who reported a sexual assault faced retaliation, that 66% of retaliation reports alleged that retaliators were in the reporter's chain of command. Approximately 1/3 of victims are discharged after reporting, separated under other than honorable conditions, thus impacting their service-connected benefit claims as veterans. In FY18, over 1 in 4 victims who did not report harassment or assault feared retaliation from their command or coworkers. Many survivors have internalized that the investigation process would be unfair, result in no outcome, or worse, adversely impact their career. And the trauma doesn't end there. 1 in 5 women veterans accessing VA have reported being the victim of MST, and 25% of the women veteran population reported inappropriate or unwanted comments or behavior by their male veteran counterparts while receiving care at VA facilities. I hope this testimony eliminates the persistent challenges in seeking justice which MST survivors endure, to include the threat of violence and potential loss of life to either suicide or homicide, but also how survivors are often condemned to a never-ending hellish cycle of victim blaming, re-victimization when recalling their traumatic experiences later in their veteran life, severe depression, PTSD, and other correlated ailments resulting from the military justice system that has repeatedly failed them. It does not always get better with time, and we cannot lose another Specialist Guillen. In the words of many who have posted their stories under the hashtag #IamViesa not one more. Chairwoman Spear and Ranking Member Kelly, distinguished members of the subcommittee, again on behalf of the thousands of service members, veterans, and allies of all stripes who have mobilized in the last few weeks to demand justice for Specialist Guillen, and the thousands of MST victims who came before her, we thank you for the opportunity to share our views on this critical miscarriage of justice, to advocate for swift passage of military justice reforms, such as those underlined in Chairwoman Spear's amendments to the FY 2021 NDAA.
Can you please wrap up, Ms. Bryant?
Yes, ma'am. I agree with Ranking Member Kelly in that MST is a scourge on our armed forces, diminishing the public trust in the institution that is the U.S. military, and leading servicewomen, veterans, and advocates in this grassroots movement to not only call for the shutdown of Fort Hood in response to Specialist Guillen's murder, but to call for no future enlistments until a thorough congressional investigation by an on-the-ground CODEL is conducted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bryant. Ms. Delgadio, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairwoman Spear, Ranking Member Kelly, distinguished members of the committee. My name is Lucy Delgadio. I am a United States Army veteran and veteran advocate, and I'm a member of a coalition of thousands of women and gender-diverse veterans seeking justice for Vanessa Guillen and systemic change for survivors. I served from 1990 to 98 active and as a reservist. My veteran advocacy work focuses on survivors of military sexual crimes, predominantly women who experience sexual harassment and assault during their military service. I was born and raised in Union City, New Jersey, to Cuban Puerto Rican parents. After my father passed away in 1989, my mother could not afford 2 daughters in college, and I followed my brother's footsteps. I am just one of many minority veterans in the community to follow this path. We seek to create legacy, to create equity, and to serve our country as patriots that we are. If I had to use one word to describe my military service, it's tarnished. In 1990, I experienced firsthand how racial slurs and sexual innuendos were fundamental training tools used by both male and female drill sergeants. Even trusted mentors would affirm to me that it's just part of military culture. I was sexually assaulted overseas in 1992 by a senior NCO. Reporting through my chain of command was my only option, and nothing was done. I was told that any pursuit for justice and accountability would ruin his career. Despite being a highly motivated soldier who was good at her job, retaliation still impacted my career. I did not speak openly about my military service or assault till 2015. These stories we bring to you are like broken records. In '92, the same year I was assaulted, my mentor, Diane Dennis, testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee about the same very topic. She and others made it clear that Tailbrook was the tip of the iceberg. Today, I testify before you, 27 years later, working tirelessly with a powerful grassroots movement that has converged in the fight for justice for Specialist Vanessa Guillen, a 20-year-old soldier whose whole life was ahead of her and should have never died. Women do not report because we fear for our safety, we fear for our future, we fear for retaliation, and I've come to see this too many times amongst my own story. Nearly every year, the same reports have pointed to the rise in numbers of cases, yet we don't know how many have gone unreported. Who are the people not reporting? They are the privates and the lieutenants, the sergeants, the commanders. They are the ones who do not feel safe reporting. They are the Vanessa Guillens. They are unaccounted for because if only a small number report sexual assault and rape, who is going to take the risk to report harassment? There is no safe reporting mechanism. There's no protection for our victims. There's no accountability for predators. The murder of Vanessa Guillen is one of a long line of issues going on in Fort Hood. The base is a hotspot. This year, 23 soldiers in Fort Hood have died or have been found dead. It begs to question, what is happening at Fort Hood? Each new story that I received from women at Fort Hood are heartbreaking. My mom and aunt pressured me to say something, but I didn't. CID closed my case without notifying me. He got off with just an assault charge and later promoted. I was pushed out for not getting over what happened to me. The triggers never really go away. They just lessen with time. These are the steps I ask for Congress today. Open the congressional investigation into the death of Specialist Vanessa Guillen, including a visit to Fort Hood so you could review the facilities yourself firsthand and see what's taking place there. Remove reporting of sexual assault and harassment from command jurisdiction and create an outside investigation entity. Commands have proven that they are incapable of investigating themselves and bringing accusers to justice. Require all future DoD annual reports to include data separated by installation to identify the problem post for readiness and compliance issues. The culture of power and control creates and molds toxic leadership. This system is so static, it is gorilla glue to the floor of the basement. We can't even see the glass ceiling when it comes to the elimination of harassment and sexual assault in the military. If this is going to change, the DoD must take this issue seriously. Zero tolerance means zero tolerance. Military justice must be swift and it must be just. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your powerful statements. Ms. DelGuadio, you referenced that there were 23 soldiers at Fort Hood who have died or been found dead. I'm deeply troubled by the homicides that have taken place that are still unsolved. You mentioned 4 homicides, 7 suicides, and 1 combat-related death, but there are 11 more. Do you have a understanding of the other 11?
Ma'am, I don't at this time. We've gotten reports from several different avenues, but I will give you further, Melissa, if you want to address that.
No, I don't have it either. I was saying that it is something that we do recognize. The permissive environment, sexual harassment, has seemed to have an impact in a portion of those 23 deaths, those homicides that have taken place, but we would have to get that back to you for the record, ma'am.
So where did you get the data?
All over the news media, different reports that we've seen from different individuals that do not want to disclose who they are within the Fort Hood community.
All right. Ms. Bryant, you referenced that a third of those who are harassed are separated, which was an astonishing number that I hadn't heard before. Where did you come up with that figure?
Yes, Chairwoman. That is, excuse me, pulling my sources here. So I believe that was pulled from one of the VA reports that I have from the Veterans Benefits Administration. The 1/3 that were separated under other than honorable conditions as well has also been noted. Sorry, I'm just looking for my exact quote here.
Well, maybe you can just provide it to the committee. It's certainly something that we have to look into
Absolutely.
with greater detail. I'm going to allow you each a minute of time to talk to us without the benefit of notes or scripts. Tell us what we should do.
First and foremost, the amendments that are currently within the FY 2021 NDAA that relate to changing the reporting chain, that relate to allowing a removal of bias in the chain of command, taking it to a special prosecutor to be able to have an impartiality in investigations and in prosecutions of sex crimes in the military. It absolutely must pass within the NDAA this year. This is the time where we must remove that implicit bias. I can speak as a former captain, a former commander, when I was just 25, 26 years old, and I had an NCO who came and spoke to me and told me about her sexual harassment and assault, and I didn't know what to do at the time. This was in 2005, 2006 timeframe, and I didn't know what I should have been doing at that point. I asked her repeatedly, I want to make this a public record and see if we can assist you in any way we can. And she declined. And this has been repeated over time, 15 years, 20 years, nothing's changed. Since Tailhook, nothing's changed. So we need that bias to be removed. We need for reporting chains to be permissible for soldiers and other service members to be able to speak with comfort and without fear of retaliation.
Thank you. Ms. DelGuadio?
I have to say that listening to the panel before me, I felt that they were doing a lot of blame on the SHARP program, and I don't think that's fair. I think we have to look at NCOs, the toxic creation of their leadership, because that's where it stems from. It's just a continual cycle of toxic leadership that is the gratification of degrading women, degrading men, degrading, our LGBTQ community. It's just the way the military works. And sir, when you said about it's not my army, that really affected me. Because when I went into the army, I followed my brother's footsteps. He was my recruiter. And he assured me that his army was gonna take care of his little sister. And it didn't. It didn't take care of me. We have to do better by our women. We have to do better by our women minorities, our black and browns, our Latinas. We're really being affected. That E1 to E4 pool in the Army are targets. We have to do better by them because 9 out of 10, those women want to stay and their experience doesn't let them stay and retention is blown away. I wanted to stay in the military. I wanted to make it a career. My brother served in the Marines for 22 years. My brother served in the Army for 32 years. I wanted that, and it was taken away from me because I didn't feel safe.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member Kelly, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairwoman Spear. And first of all, I thank each of you for your service to this great nation. Thank you. It means something. Even if it was a bad experience, I still thank you for choosing to serve our country. That is very admirable. I do want to talk about, it bothers me that we talk about 23 deaths and we relate all of those to sexual harassment, but we don't even know who the 23 are. That bothers me. That is a statement that I don't need numbers thrown out. I need actual facts that have a basis. So that bothers me. And then I want to touch a little bit on Specialist Guillen. Amazing human being, and that should never have happened. An amazing soldier, that should never have happened. I don't think there's anybody on this panel. I don't think there's anybody at Fort Hood. I don't think there's anybody in the Department of Defense who in any way can justify her unlawful and awful killing. My heart and soul goes out to that family. When you serve your nation, you expect to be protected. But that being said, the sexual harassment and the murder are two separate things. They are not connected in any way. And to suggest otherwise is just not true. That is not what the facts. Now, there may be other facts later that reveal that, but I can tell you from my knowledge, and I've had people testify on this, and I've been to Fort Hood. I've spent over a year of my life at Fort Hood, and it is a large, sprawling complex. I thank each of you, but we have to be real careful because words have meanings, and there are consequences to tying things together that are unrelated, and I think they have a negative impact on what we're trying to achieve, because I'm going to tell you what I'm trying to achieve. I want a Department of Defense that no sexual harassment or no sexual assault ever occurs, that no racism, no extremism is ever allowed. Now, I know that's a rainbow and cherry tree approach because there are bad people in this world and there always will be, and some of those will become soldiers or sailors or airmen and Marines. But that is my goal, and so what can we do? What can we do to our NCO Corps? Because I think that's the key. I think that is the key. What can we do to train or instill or inspire our service members at the proper level to let people know when you do this, the entire Army, the entire Navy is going to out you. We are going to put you out there to shame you for doing these dastardly deeds that you have done. What can we do to train our NCOs, Ms. Bryant?
In training our NCOs, I agree with you in that that is key to this, but it's at all levels. It's at the service academies. It's at at boot camp. It's at AIT. It needs to be continuous, and it needs to be iterative. That's what needs to happen. We need to inculcate within our ranks that this will not be tolerated, and there will be consequences and repercussions for your actions. I will simply say this. I do disagree in that the permissive environment that I've experienced, that Lucy has experienced, that Vanessa Guillen experienced, if it's okay to laugh and joke about how we look in our uniform, to grope us, to say things, and then we laugh it off, and then we're shamed into being able to speak out loud.
And you get to say
that creates
reclaiming
a
my time,
hostile environment.
Reclaiming my time. I absolutely agree with what you just said, but that's not what I'm trying to do is what can we do for our NCOs, our junior officers, our senior officers, what can we do to make sure that this doesn't continue to happen? That's what I want to do. I agree there's a problem, so I'm not disagreeing.
It's not a yearly discussion. It's a continuous discussion. We just do, a few hours in basic training, a few hours in AIT, maybe when they go to BNOC, maybe when they go to others. It has to be continuous. It's a conversation. It's happening all the time. We have to have the candid discussions. We have to create a culture that if I say to Melissa, I'm being harassed, it has to be a courageous conversation. We do not create a courageous conversation. We have to instill that in our military. If a woman, a man wants to go into the military, we have to say, okay, X, Y, and Z could possibly happen, and you could be courageous enough, and we're going to protect you.
I agree, and let me reclaim just a second, because I agree, and I think one of the keys is we've got to teach them early. It's got to measure, like Mr. Crow said, it's got to be in time. We've got to give hours and blocks of instruction, and it's got to continue not online, but in person throughout a career. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, thank you again, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Kelly. I think the key is we've got to change the whole program, because online is not cutting it. And I agree with you. I think the NCOs need to have specialized training as well. Ms. Davis, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Bryant, Ms. Delgado. I'm very pleased that you're here. Thank you. And for all that you've done to certainly highlight and bring the attention to Specialist Vanessa Guillen. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your look at what happened regarding AWOL for Ms. Guillen. What did you see that was done correctly? But more, what was wrong?
You know what blew me, thank you, ma'am. What blew me away is that if a weapon went missing, nobody would have been allowed to go home. Her property was still in her unit. That should have indicated something. We were more accountable for the weapons in that unit than for our own soldier. Mm-hmm. Right there, that blew me away. And I still repeat it over my head that a weapon had more accountability than a young woman soldier. So that, to me, was heart-wrenching. We have to do better by us. If you had evidence that something possibly happened, her stuff was there. Vanessa's stuff was there. And nobody had any indication of, like, this is not AWOL. It's just not.
Yeah.
And if I make
Ms. Bryan too, maybe I mean, what comes to, why do you think that happened? I mean, was it, and I understand as well that Private Gregory Morales, also under the same circumstances, but what, is it because they just decided that there was something about?
Ma'am, I think the issue that is the elephant in the room in the military is addressing race. It's addressing the intersectionality that impacts our service. Those of us who are women of color who serve, we know that double burden all too well. And I would like to point out that I'm sure this committee has heard many times over the 5 years that Bo Bergdahl walked off a fire base and went missing, and how much blood and treasure the Army, the military spent looking for him. But she was missing, her stuff was there, and no one went looking for her.
Yeah.
Because black and brown women go missing all the time and no one cares.
And there did seem to be a sense that they believed that she had walked away. And that was striking, truly striking. We're trying to get at some of the ways in which, as people are recruited, come into the service, serve, whether it's as an NCO, non-commissioned officer, or even through the ranks of officers. Is there something in the way that we conduct surveys, climate surveys, that doesn't allow people to come forward and truly say what they know? As it's, if you see something, do something. What can be done about that as individuals? As you've experienced that. Some of our colleagues have experienced that as well.
I think of having listening sessions with your command is not acceptable. I think you have to have that gender-specific conversation. Because I know that if I'm in the room with my male counterparts, I'm not going to be as honest and open as possible to what happened to me. I think there should be an independent party practice when it comes to survey initiation. I think we have to also do better of what type of data we're aggregating. You know, age, rank, and gender is just not enough. We need to know what type of ethnic background you are. We need to know your sexuality. We need to know all those factors. And I think that will do a great justice when it comes to being more honest and open.
Should there be a greater hand when someone is being considered for a promotion, that the members of the unit, that the family has an opportunity to weigh in a way that's different from what happens today?
I was plagued by promotion of not getting promoted because of my weight. The Army weight requirements I never met. So the burden in 1992 of getting constantly tape measured was A, horrible, but B, was part of the harassment that I endured. Because when an NCO is tape measuring you and touching you in places that you don't want to be touched, it's horrifying. So that alone, I missed 2 promotions because I was 2 pounds overweight and my BMI did not match. That's absolutely absurd. I was a highly motivated soldier. It shouldn't have meant that my 2 pounds were going to deny my promotion.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
My understanding is now NCOs do not take those kind of measurements, thank God.
Thank God for the BMI machines, because those tape measures were just absolutely awful. Excuse me for that comment.
Ms. Escobar, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both to our panelists for being here and for sharing your stories with us. We know that Vanessa Guillen told her family that she was afraid of reporting sexual harassment. And you both have been subjected to harassment and assault. I think it's very important for this committee, as we continue to try to change things that have been going on since women entered the military ranks, and actually before that, because men also are victims of sexual assault and sexual harassment. Help us understand, when you do report it, can you tell us what happens? What are the actual moments, and what happens in the moments and the weeks afterwards that creates an environment of fear and retaliation?
I would say that what happens versus what should happen is the problem. And that is that there are formal reporting requirements. I understand that Colonel Wimpy, explained that. It's articulated pretty detailed, in a pretty detailed way within SAPRO guidelines. However, that's not what actually occurs. And that's what we have experienced ourselves. And over time, that's what we've heard repeated by thousands of women and male survivors as well, who say that they did speak to a command. They did speak to someone, and it just didn't go any further. Or they were told, well, why don't you think about this? Think twice. Again, we constantly hear the refrain of, think of so-and-so's career. Sometimes think of your own career. And that's what happens where that fear of retaliation comes. It's a hopelessness, where you feel as though, what's the point? I also want to very quickly answer back to Congresswoman Spears' question. The data on the third of victims who were discharged after reporting came from an aggregate of Protect Our Defenders. It's derived from the DoD SAPRO report from 2016.
For me, it was, are you sure? Are you sure that happened? And that shouldn't be a question asked. Are you sure it happened? I heard that statement for a whole week. Are you sure it happened? And from multiple members of my chain of command. And that's what's disheartening, is that they just don't believe us. or they're just protecting the person who is higher ranking than you. I was an E3. Shouldn't have never happened to me.
And once you did, because both of you reported, and even after clearly the first step, you're discouraged. You are told to think of your career, think of the person who assaulted you or harassed you, think of their career. So that's the first point where we need reform. What happened after you reported, when you decided that regardless of the consequences, it's important for me to report? What happened then?
In my case, unfortunately, I shrugged it off. I was gaslit to believe that as an officer, that was the price of admission to being in the Army. I was often the only woman officer around. I also felt very much of a mama bear protective mode for my fellow soldiers. And so I would try to protect them when they would come to me and then further on report. But in my own case, I wasn't strong enough to do the same.
Mine was just completely swept under the rug. I don't have anything. No justice. Being here today is somewhat justice for me. Speaking to you all is justice for me. Being able to speak about it honestly and openly is justice. And a lot of us feel this way because nothing gets done.
Thank you both. Madam Chair, this is very similar to what I have heard in my own district from victims, an inability to get information about why something was dismissed, an accusation was dismissed, why there was no further investigation, leaving victims even more confused, leaving victims even more distraught, feeling like there is no justice. And this is for assault, much less for harassment. This is why I do support our efforts to look at innovative ways to reform the system, which includes taking it outside of the chain of command. Thank you both very much. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. DeGuadio, what happened to your assailant?
Ma'am, I don't know. He just went going on.
He stayed within the military.
He stayed within the military. Again, when I left, I left. I completely disconnected.
Thank you. Ms. Garcia, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's good to see you all again. And you know, just hearing your stories just really tears at my heart because, again, it just brings so many memories of the Vanessa Guillen case, and of course, hearing from her family members, her sister, her mother, about what she shared with them. And I can assure you that we shared this with her command as soon as I was able to communicate with them. And I can also tell you that it was disappointing when I visited Fort Hood in June 23rd, which already was 2 months after she'd been missing, that they admitted that they had not pursued investigating the sexual harassment allegations because they were doing a criminal investigation. And I still recall the meeting because I pointed out that sometimes the sexual harassment can be the motive for a murder. But yet they said, well, we're only doing criminal. So I think that there may have been a disconnect because it's possible that it could have been connected. They just didn't pursue that line of investigation. Now they have, but they continue to say that there's no credible evidence. So apparently, so far, they have found anything from the parents or friends not credible. But we're still working on it. So thank you for being here and sharing. And you know, it's just so hard to even crystallize a question. You've heard the previous testimony from the panel and the colonel saying that he was looking at it quickly to get a snapshot of what was going on. But we know she went missing the 22nd, and they didn't start till July 27th, 4 months later. Is that quick? I mean, is that indicative of the inaction in response to these kinds of allegations? And that's a question for both of you.
It's absolutely indicative of the lack of caring for a soldier's life. To also answer that question, I want to note back to the 23 others that have died, because this is a report from the Army to CNN. We know that 7 were off-duty accidents, 7 were suicide, 1 was combat, 4 were homicide, 2 natural causes, and 1 undetermined.
Does that include I think there now is 5 soldiers from Brotherhood that have died within a year.
Mm-hmm.
Or does that also includes the alleged perpetrator of this case?
It does. And I think that when you talk about especially suicide, when I talked about in my opening remarks of what we experience even as veterans, as a veteran advocate, I deal with women and men who are survivors who have PTSD from MST, who have suicidal ideation, who often sadly succumb to the sadness that haunts them. And so there is correlation between that command climate, that permissive environment for hostility, and then what ultimately happens to our bodies when we can't take it anymore.
Right, Ms. Claudia, your response to my question.
I'll speak personally.
Okay.
The minute it happened, for me, I became a different soldier. And my command treated me differently, and my behavior changed. And that's the problem. They started looking at me as a behavioral problem, not as an assault victim. And that's something that needs to be addressed in this culture. Because the minute we claim our sexual harassment, the minute we claim our assault, then we start it's PTSD right away. You become angry, you become bitter, you become very responsive to things that are taking place. You become defensive, and then you're the issue.
Right. So let me ask you the question I try to ask the colonel. What about this business between informal and formal? I mean, you all are shaking your heads. What does that mean?
You know, the formal is going to your chain of command, they do all the paperwork, blah, blah, blah. The informal is, when it happened to me is 1992. You know, we didn't have social media, we didn't have mechanisms to, record something. So, again, I would take that message that the parents have received, the calls that she made to Lupe and Mayra, the calls she made to her friends, to me, that's informal.
But apparently it's been concluded it's not credible, at least
Yeah, it's
so
incredible,
far.
but honestly, if she told her parents and she's not here right now to testify, that should say something and speak volumes.
All right, your time has expired.
Yield back, thank you.
Ms. Jackson Lee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I indicated that Vanessa Leon was a soldier at that time. Enthusiastic.
Is her microphone on? Is her microphone?
Certainly thank the previous panel as well for their service. Would you kindly, both of you, just give me, Ms. Bryan, I want to call you Captain, what was your time of service? What years were you in?
I served from active duty from 2001 through to 2009, ma'am.
And Ms. DeGardio?
Ma'am, from 90 to 98, active and reserves.
So in the course of both of you, there were conflicts, wars that this nation was involved in, and I would imagine every single soldier was valuable and should have been considered as such. As I understand Ms. Gillion's last days, she came in on a day off or extended herself as any good soldier, wasn't at a picnic, was there counting arsenal weapons, if you will, and she was doing her job. So I want to pose this line of questions. I understand her family came up as close as they are, not getting that regular call the very day that she was missing, and arrived about 2:30 a.m. in the morning, but did not get seen until 9 a.m. So my question is, I understand discipline. I'm a civilian. What does that culture do? To me, that looks offensive. It's time lost in the investigation. Obviously, 70 days or however long it was that my colleague indicated. That, too, seems to diminish human life when all the movies that we see, military movies, says don't leave one soldier behind. Captain, and then I didn't get Ms. Delgado's rank. I'll call you that as well. Captain?
It's absolutely a miscarriage of justice to not have that investigation move forward. I raised about Bo Bergdahl earlier, and I can't help but think when he walked off his fire base in 2009, I was in the Pentagon at the time. I was a GS-14 by then. And we had meeting after meeting, battle update brief after battle update brief, looking for this man who walked off of a fire base and was captured by the Taliban, or the Haqqani network, I should say. And no one cared where Vanessa Guillen was for hours, and she's right there in garrison with the resources of both the Killeen Police Department as well as the military police on Fort Hood. Ma'am, that's unsat.
Thank you, Ms. Delgado, and I have other questions, so any comment on that point?
For me, again, I think is disrespectful. Her family went there to look for her. You should have worked with urgency and immediacy, because I know my family would have been really looking for an answer, and for them not to give it to them is just disrespectful.
And discipline and war readiness should have nothing to do with human decency. And I think one of the issues in the culture of the United States military overall is that they equate discipline and the toughness of the military with dealing differently with human needs. I believe of Vanessa Guillen in terms of sexual harassment. I believe it in terms of her parents. I believe it. So let me just get this question in. You mentioned that CID, this is an internal process, closes cases. I think someone mentioned they closed their case. I know there's been great progress with Congresswoman Spears on the process, but I too believe of an independent investigation and process. But explain what that means. Closed it, and then someone said, I don't know if it was you, Delgado, what was your rank? I'm sorry.
E4, ma'am.
E4, that they went on in their career. They went on and got promotion. Someone said they went on and got promotion. I think it's important for the military to hear what that means when there's an investigation, then someone went on, I know innocent until proven guilty, but then went on and got promoted.
So
Captain, you want to start with that, please? My final questions.
It absolutely speaks to the culture within the military, the very essence of what needs to change. It's something where when their career, when the offender's career is more favored upon, when the preponderance of evidence is not considered, oftentimes you will hear that statements are inconclusive, sworn statements are inconclusive. We took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. No one's going to lie about their assault or their harassment. And so that statement on its surface needs to be accepted. We need to believe women, we need to believe survivors, and that needs to be a zero tolerance of closing investigations until you have turned over every stone.
So the young lady that provided the statement for me, when she found out I was testifying, she had someone contact me, and again, you know, she didn't know that CID closed her case until she was unnotified, until she, you know, asked what's going on. That's when they told her, oh, your case is closed. And that just, it's like a common theme when you talk to survivors. It's all these statements that I made are common themes. You know, CID closed a case without notifying me. He got off, you know, he just had an assault charge and then promoted. And then we're made to be the bad guy.
Thank you, Ms. Delgadio.
Sorry.
Her time has expired. Thank you all for being here. Your testimony was extraordinarily powerful. And I think for all of the members who have participated in the panel, it's been a very sobering one and a very important one. I want to say to the Guillen family that we are not going to let Vanessa to have died in vain. And every step will be pursued to find justice There is legislation that will be introduced, but beyond that, I intend to lead a CODEL to Fort Hood within the next month, and I invite all my colleagues to join me. We are going to continue to investigate this. Thank you again for being here. We stand adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you.